Well, good afternoon. Obviously, I'm delighted to be here. What a fantastic venue, and I was lucky to be here on Friday afternoon talking with some of the faculty and sports groups in the local area and some of the undergraduate and graduate students. And it's a marvelous institution with a very rich history in sport performance, and I wish them well in the future for sure. And thanks very much to the International Ice Hockey Federation for having me back again. I was intrigued by the session and the thematic for today being around athlete-centered whatever. Because as far as I've been concerned throughout my career, and I'm certain most people, is that we all want to be athlete-centered. We've all focused on that. It's just that we tend to get caught up in the rush, and particularly in team sports where we sort of gravitate everything to the sort of average, to the mean. Or sometimes worse, we cater to just a few superstars and we just bring everyone else along on the coattails of those other people. One of the key things I would like to stress to you is really what is happening in the world of coaching and coaching communication. The whole concept of transformational coaching, where you as coaches really need to be schooled in how you communicate. And I know we take it for granted about talking to people, but I mean there are lots of now really good cues and clues as to how to make sure that people understand your messaging and you listen to the key people around you, which isn't just the players, it's your other staff as well, so that you actually then do the best possible thing you can for each individual athlete. So I'm going to take you through some stuff here, and I have a real word of caution as well around the increasing levels of technology that are coming at us. And you'll see in the presentation why at every level you need to try to simplify that. So I'm going to go straight into it, if I may. Well, first off, the thematic over the last 2 days has covered a whole number of different areas, and I haven't covered every theme, but there's a golden thread between all of these ultimately comes down to that athlete in the center of whatever discussion you're having. And then obviously in a team sport, you can sort of manage it depending on the entire squad, the particular line or shifts that you're going to have, and then the forwards versus the defense versus the netminders, exactly how you're going to sort of structure what you do. And at the end of the day, of course, each one of those players is an individual. So you may prescribe a particular intervention. Let's say it's a physical intervention. But for the whole squad, if you all do exactly the same piece of work at any moment in time, probably roughly 1/3 of them will be working too hard, 1/3 of them will be optimally working, and 1/3 of them will be not working hard enough. And you can imagine as that rolls forward over days and weeks and months, you start to get into a pretty dangerous territory. And that's before you even start talking about actually playing the game, the number of minutes, the level of intensity, those people on the special teams versus those that aren't, and how you're tracking that. And here starts to become a little bit of the worrisome thing. We just talked about a very simple term of tracking some things, but there's an awful lot of information that you can track, and you can get buried very quickly in information. You have to be able to filter what is important, and it may change over time. What is important this month may be quite different than what is important next month. What is important for the people playing more than 15 minutes a game compared to those only playing 5 minutes or less. And that starts to become very worrisome for you. So my job today, as usual, is to try and throw the rock in the pond, cause some ripples, make you think. You don't have to agree with what I'm saying. You don't even have to like me. But I really want you to go away and really think about this, because the area that we're going to talk about, technology in particular, and the tools you have, is a rapidly growing area, and it's only going to get worse for you. And by worse, I mean bewildering. How do you make decisions that are truly going to help you? Lots and lots of technology available. Some of it with very, very steep learning curves when you don't even have the time to read a book, let alone work out a very complex piece of, say, software. So, lots of questions for you, and I would remind you, one of the books I think that's really very pertinent to coaching and how you do things, and was published several years ago with, of course, The 5 Whys by Simon Sinek. Okay, so if you haven't read that book, I would suggest you do. It's a philosophy around always asking the word why first, asking yourself why you do something, and then going to the how, are you going to implement a strategy, and then what at the end. And many people often rush to the what first, never actually ask themselves why they're doing things. And I want to finish this presentation with a challenge to all of you as to how the game has evolved in terms of its being played. Truly, it has changed dramatically. I mean, I grew up watching the Olympic form of the game, coming from Great Britain, right? We didn't really have too much hockey on television back in the 80s, for example, in the 90s. And it was only when I went to Canada, and actually I was very spoiled. The first game I ever saw was Game 4 of the Stanley Cup final, the last time the Oilers won it, because I was at the University of Alberta in Edmonton. They show those classic games from the 80s and 90s on Canadian and US TV all the time now. And I watch them, and I go, compared to today's games. And these were some of the greats playing that game, superbly talented, but the pace of the game completely off the back of the bus compared to today. And yet, what I find interesting is tactically, in many instances, we still play that game. And one of the challenges is this. I'd like you to consider this aspect. So the coach of today, teaching typically the 10 to 18-year-olds, okay, is of a particular age. They were playing the game themselves, the coaches, maybe 20 years ago, being taught by coaches of a similar age who played the game 20 years before them. So we're coaching and teaching the next generation based off a mindset that could be 40 to 50 years old. And we're getting them ready, if we move along another decade and a half to maybe 2 decades, to when they really will be at their peak for a game that we have no idea what it looks like. No idea. This is absolutely why you need to ask yourself the question, why do I do things? Why are we coaching in a particular way? Particularly if you're dealing with the developmental groups. Okay? The concept of the dashboard, I really want to drive home. You're going to see a lot of that symbol. The dashboard of your on-ice training. What does it look like? Different factors could be skating, obviously passing, reception of the puck, offense versus defense. What kind of game theory do you teach? Remember, any kid doing computer science is taught game theory. But how many of you truly understand game theory for the invasion sports, which hockey is one of them? Really? Or do you teach systems robotically? If you want to move away from to an athlete-centered way of doing things, then you teach them how to play the game, why they do things in the game, not simply go stand on the blue line. Because one of these days they go stand on the blue line in completely the wrong situation, because that's what they're taught to do. So I'm going to talk a little bit about foundation. The seasonal plan, I see there's some software up there with the ice hockey group over there. The on and off ice aspects you might want to consider. The psychological envelope. I mean, I'm a physiologist, but I'll tell you this. When it comes to the daily training environment, and indeed particularly competition, the physiology and the biomechanics are kind of wrapped up together. But they are surrounded and enmeshed in the psychological aspect, the emotional component. The country that I live in at the moment, you could argue about some poor emotional control last night. 22 minutes of penalties. Not going to win too many games like that. Really. So the emotional concept, the mindset in training to do stuff that is difficult, not just the easy stuff, not the stuff that you're already good at. That's not going to improve you. But to have the mindset to push the envelope. And then in competition, perhaps being able to come back from behind. It's remarkable. Look to other sports. Look to tennis, for example, because it's remarkable, the reliability of those guys who can win in 5-set situations. And there's a relatively few of them. So what are those characteristics that makes an Agassi, for example, in his heyday, be one of the most reliable people that you would put your money on going into the 5th set? What about for you? You become known as an organization, not simply the team you have right now, the organization. It's the organizations that stand the test of time. The human resource will change over time. So what I'm trying to say to you is the mindset within the organization. What does that become known for. Barcelona, in the great days of Pep. Because you can do it. That doesn't take money. That's just a willingness and an attitude to put in place processes. Equipment. No one ever considers equipment. Why are your players using a particular stick? In the professional leagues, it's because they get paid to. But is it necessarily the best stick for them? The best skates, the best equipment? We never seem to ask that. We take it for granted all the time. It's kind of important, that stuff. And then finally, playing style. And I'm going to really come back to that, because at the end of the day, all of this comes to how you play this game, which is why I went on that sort of mini rant just then. Okay. It's a complex picture that you're dealing with. Global performance. So you have this athletic performance, which is an integrated aspect of all these things: physiology, technique, psychology, tactics, and the one we all forget about, health and lifestyle. I am amazed that in some of the professional leagues, particularly a pretty famous one in North America, they sign these young kids, you know, in the draft sometimes. Some they send them down to their minor teams, or they continue to play in some of the other developmental leagues, but they don't really look after them. They pay all this money, and they wonder why they come through the program or the system in a hit or miss way. And even when they make some of the big teams, they're being paid all this money, and yet they're not really that well looked after. There's been a few cases. You remember how Crosby used to live in the basement of a well-known player, right? If you remember that. He lived in Mario's basement, and they looked after him. He was a kid earning gazillions of dollars, you know, lived away from home a little bit, but really didn't know how to look after himself as he developed into a true professional. But what do you do to look after these players? You want an athlete-centered approach? They're your resource. How well do we look after them? And it doesn't take much effort. And one of the fundamental things is this health and lifestyle overall. Because if they're not fit and healthy and well rested at key times, they're certainly not going to train very well, and they definitely won't compete very well for you, which is in your best interest as well as theirs. This gets more complex, because down at the bottom you can see any of these big five, physiology, technique, etc., they're on a continuum from what is optimal to what may be something then less optimal. In the case of physiology, you might use the medical term being overtrained, although I must admit in my whole history I've rarely seen that. I've seen lots of overreached people, but not truly overtrained. In technique, it could be optimal versus poor. As you come across to health and lifestyle, optimal versus being sick or injured. You get the idea? So every one of them has a sliding scale. So you could put a dashboard on each one of these things, around each player, the squad as a whole, and indeed your whole workforce. Because here's the other thing we forget about. In an athlete-centered model, if you're doing your job as a coach, it's extremely taxing. So what goes on with your recovery and regeneration? You've got to be on your game at every practice, not simply behind the bench in the game, but every practice. Because, believe it or not, one of the most important things that the sports science research shows is the importance of the coaching eye, of being able to look at a player in the eye and know what kind of mood state they're in that day, just by their gait or their demeanor, how they bounce in or not, or they slouch in, or whatever it might be, or if they've got breakouts or whatever. And you will only pick up on those nuances if you are fresh. So an athlete-centered model or approach, ironically, starts with you guys, the coaches. And you can then sort of break out into the various aspects. I talked here about health and lifestyle. So you could have basic health, you could have the non-training stress. This could be things like relationships, worrying about money, I don't know, whatever it could be. But those things, stress is stress. It doesn't matter where it's coming to. It doesn't matter whether it's on training, lifestyle, poor nutrition. It's cumulative on the body. So you have a lot of information coming at you that you have to be very, very careful with. And you have to become very, very good at discerning and filtering out those things that are just noise in the system. That at this moment in time, yeah, it's happening, but it's not that important for you. And the key thing that I find lacking, And it's not a slur on people that sell stuff to you, but who is your trusted source for advice? I mean, I'm wearing a particular wearable piece of technology here, but let's say you wanted to equip your team. Who do you go to talk to find out what is the most appropriate for your team? And more importantly, something that can actually grow with your team, rather than buying something off the shelf, paying a lot of money, and then it's only good for a couple of seasons because it gets surpassed by something else. Who do you ask? Because you know you're going to get a certain piece of information from the people trying to sell you this. Now, some of you may be very sophisticated organizations with a lot of staff, and you could perhaps task someone that's kind of interested in the area. But other people, maybe it's just you and your immediate coaching staff. The key thing is, somehow you have to find someone that's going to be able to give you a balanced discussion. They understand your needs of what you need to give you pertinent information as quickly as possible without too much bother. This is why in my book, wherever possible, you could either utilize universities and colleges, lots of intelligent people lying around the place, and you could form a relationship with someone there. You could have someone identified, as I said, in your staff that has a particular bent, or you could put the feelers out, and you know which generation are going to be able to help you. And it's probably not us in this room, it's the kids themselves. Maybe even one of your players. Because they're the people really understanding. You know, now in North America, anyone below the age of 15 doesn't have one of these. Okay? Don't have a watch. This one only does 3 things. Okay? Whereas you pull out your smartphone, it does a gazillion things. It certainly does everything this can do. But you can also talk to someone across the other side of the planet. You can send text messages. You can surf the net. You could even phone someone on the space station. That's what kids expect. So you have an untapped source right in front of you in some of these young kids, okay? Even if you don't have the sophisticated capability and the resources to pay a professional to help you. But you need to find this, okay? There's lots and lots of good systems. There's 2 up there that I know of. I'm going to show you a whole bunch, and I have no association with any of the slides. I'm just going to show you some with the manufacturers I'm going to show you. I'm just going to show you that there's a lot of stuff out there. But who gives you the balanced advice, and more appropriately, what is really in your best interest? What's going to give the information that you need to know? Which, of course, comes back to that. You have to have asked yourself, why, how, what are my needs before you even go shopping? What do you need to know to make your job much better and be a little bit more athlete-centered? This leads to this as well. We're in a sport where most of the time we're focused always on the lag metrics. What I mean by that, these are the late metrics. These are the metrics to do with playing the game, the score, the plus minus, the number of shots, the number of saves, the number of penalty minutes, all this type of stuff. But what we really should be focused on is how you get to that, the lead metrics, and peel back the layers of the onion, if you like, that take us all the way back to how well we skate. What's our decision-making like? What's our pass execution percentage look like? What's our shots on goal look like? All these type of things. So there's a nested process, and it's all about process. Get the process right, you'll get to the outcome lag metrics you want, at least eventually. I'm going to talk a bit about wearables. Because just in the United States, over the last few years, we've gone from under $1 billion of turnover to well in excess of $5 billion. And as you can see, this is starting to go to an exponential growth curve. It's coming at you fast. So there's gadgets coming out all the time for all areas, from biomechanics to physiology to psychology to game analysis to nutritional analysis. It's just bewildering unless you understand, again, and have a hierarchy of your needs. What, if you have this amount to spend, what would you do first and why? You can wear technology all over the place. Wrist, feet, within clothing. You can have it built into visors. It's coming. In other sports, it's already there. You watch the Spanish Grand Prix today, for example, and you look at the technology that's coming through from their drivers not just the car, but what's happening to the drivers. This is coming to you fast and furious. What the cyclists were wearing just recently in the Giro in Italy. This is going to come to your sport. And then the type of sensors that are really coming to us, from the military, because this is the area that's really driving wearable technology. Just recently I was dealing with some sniper groups in the United States, and the type of technology they have, from tattoos that they just put onto their forearm that tell everything from their sweat rate, okay, to the type of nutrients they're actually losing. And this is all then linked up to their communication system, straight up to a satellite, and some guy sitting back in the United States, wherever those particular group are, knows exactly what's happening. And that's on top of heart rate and breathing rate, kind of important for snipers, for example. There's thermal regulation. All this type of stuff is coming. That's just in the clothing and on the body. Then obviously we've got any of the other type of wearables I've mentioned, certainly aspects that will start to affect the vision in sport, which is a massive growth area alone. Information actually coming in. Can you imagine being able to skate up the ice and know from your visor exactly what's going on behind you? It's coming. It's coming. Technology is there already in other domains. You're all very familiar with the sort of standard type stuff. Immediately I would say to you, if you're actually not on this particular bandwagon already, then you're missing the boat. Why I mentioned that effect of a particular training set on people early on about in the rule of thirds. A third, working very hard, a third working just optimally, and a third underworking in any situation. You can already get to that information, at least quantifiable, from this. Video analysis. This is a particular system, very sophisticated one, that looks at both training and in competition, and I want you to think of that. There's one thing to look at competition, and most of you have lots of different systems, from manual systems, people sitting up in the high seats just watching the game and using some kind of criteria, checking things off. Others are using video in fairly sophisticated forms. But the one area that I find unusual, that we don't do a lot of, often because of turnover of information, is watching training. Video is an incredibly powerful tool to show people what we're doing. You can look at the difference between individual sports and team sports. The only thing I would say is, although this group are doing this more from a marketing point of view, you're actually dealing with individuals. So you nest the individuals within the team sport anyway, if you're really doing your job. I would remind you again that any idiot can train hard. That doesn't take a PhD. That doesn't take anything unusual. The key thing is, are you training smart? Of course. Are you doing the right thing? And what you want to be able to do is look at this particular type of analysis. And I don't want to oversimplify it. This is some classic work by Zatskiorski. And the only suggestion is here, if I walk you through this, because it's important you understand this aspect, because this, in like 3 colored lines, is what is happening to your players, but in a bit more of a complex way, because this is just one instant. You've got training every day, possibly, and then games every so often, worsening this problem. So what you have here, right there, that horizontal line is their current state right now. Then you do something, whatever it is. It could be an off-ice session, it could be travel, it could be an on-ice game, and that's signified by this block up here, okay? Which causes some change in that individual. Now, if it was, say, a training set, you would gain some fitness, right? So you would see the top of that, you see the top of the orange line. You gain in fitness by having done that work. The only problem is that gain is associated, obviously, with some kind of fatigue. The fatigue that is specific to what on earth it was that you actually did, which is associated with this line. So you get a positive gain in fitness, but in the short term, immediately having done it, you have some residual fatigue. With me on that? Okay. Now, without doing anything else, we run the clock of just existence. So over time, we will reduce the fatigue back to the 0 point. We lose a little bit of fitness, of course, because we're just recovering. But the net effect eventually is that sorry, here's the fatigue curve coming here, back to here. At some point, we have a net gain in that particular parameter. It could be skill, it could be endurance, it could be speed, it could be whatever. You understand what I'm saying to you? This is the game you're actually playing. You want to know about this because that green line that the Russians in their classic literature that is forgotten at lost at times in the West is the level of preparedness, which tells you at what point at this moment in time are my players in a particular state of getting ready for the next training or the next game. You can see, however, that it gets worse. If we suddenly put another training block right here or another game, these lines have not come back to zero yet, have they? So you can see where those classic examples showing you start to dig the pit of despair, because then all of a sudden the fatigue drops even further down and goes on and on and on until some point that you allow or put into place some form of optimal recovery strategy. Do you understand what I'm saying? So as we roll forward, I want you to keep that in mind with this next slides that I'm going to show you, the foundation ones. So first off, on the dashboard, there are a number of things on here. Health, nutrition, sleep, all that type of stuff. For me, if you're coming into September and you don't have a good understanding of base health, and these athletes are not in a true state of recovery and regeneration, despite all the traditional pressures of coming to camp and making the team and all that other stuff, you can imagine what November and December are going to look like unless you get it right here. We dig a big pit, and often as not because we don't understand what we're looking at. Okay, and they're hopped up and they can run for a few weeks looking quite good, but they're about to fall off the edge. Wouldn't it be good to know about that? And which third of the team are really in trouble, which third are doing okay, and which third maybe need a little bit more even? So, I want this as a thought pattern for you. This comes from Winner Mawissa's work, who's a pretty world-renowned physician in the world of hockey, a lot to do with concussion. If you allow that that's the optimal healthy baseline, you can imagine that if we drop below that, okay, we get some niggling injuries, they're getting upper respiratory tract infections, those type of niggling things, we drop below that area and we become susceptible to perhaps greater illness or injury unless we do something. And I'm going to tell you a real story about our winter athletes in Calgary in a second. Worse still, oh dear. I've got no patience with my button. Sorry. Worse still, if we don't do anything about this orange zone when they've dropped below, so you can imagine this could be late September, okay? They've been working hard in camp, they've made the team, played some exhibition games, and you're really pushing them, trying to get them more time on ice, blah, 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 blah. You can run into this area. Access to care for illness and injury. In other words, they've really now got into some kind of chronic situation. So everything below this line will have a negative effect on performance at some stage, either acutely or chronically. Compared to what we really should be doing, if we understood how we need to plan, is this aspect. We're trying to move above this line, get them fitter, to remove barriers to performance, optimizing their recovery, optimizing. So here you are, you plan for your squad. You give them all a day off. All of them. But again, the rule of thirds. Maybe a third of them didn't actually need the day off. Maybe a third of them need 3 days off. And a third of them, the 1 day off is perfect. Wouldn't it be good to have some clues as to what that looks like? And as I said, it starts with your eye and that of your coaching staff. And then finally, you can get into the serious areas, which is this one. Really optimizing training. So you've actually looked and planned exactly. So you might have, I don't know, 15 forwards. Just take the number out of the top of my head. What are you doing specifically with those 15 forwards to move them forward in terms of their preparation and, on top of that then, tactical, technical elements? What specifically? Are you getting to that level of planning? Because the things above the white line are truly performance enhancing. Did you spot that their spring, their first 3 meters, their first 5 strides, whatever it might be, are actually off the mark a little bit? Were you able to quantify that? with technology available right now, you could see it in training and almost have instant feedback. Could you have known that even before they stepped on the ice by a simple piece of wearable technology that might have given you a clue? I don't think they're going to be that sharp. What about if they came back and you saw what their sleep patterns were? And a group that traditionally are having 7 to 8 hours sleep a night, over the last 3 nights have averaged 5. I would guarantee then that's going to have effect on their neural system. I would not expect them to be super fast under those circumstances. I would expect them to make poor decisions on the ice. I would expect your netminders to be totally off the back of the bus, watching the pucks fly past them. All by some very simple tools, if you know what you need. Now, in Calgary a few years ago, when we actually did an analysis, forced all our sports to actually do this, from bobsleigh to skiing to cross-country, through to the hockey groups, we actually came up with an analysis that the vast majority of our athletes, this is in a situation, this is a relatively world-leading training center for winter sports, and our athletes were all below the line. Gave us a big wake-up call. We were merrily going on, and we were saying as long as they weren't sick, you know, and we were performing reasonably well, we must be doing it right. Clearly we weren't, because when we really looked at what we were doing, we were not doing a very good job about the care of our athletes. And this is the baseline. And routinely through the course of the year, you need to come in and check on that. I remind you, unless they're fit, healthy, well-rested, they're not going to train very well, and they're certainly not going to compete very well, and you are under great challenges in your sport. One, you're playing in the winter. That's always going to be a disaster. You travel a lot. Your players are constantly around lots of people. This is a recipe for getting sick. Add to that the training demands, and then the playing demands. Remember, playing is the highest form of training. You're already putting them in situations that are going to challenge them from a health and injury point of view. The biggest thing for me, in terms of all the tools that you have, taking a little bit of a different direction here, is the scouting report. The scouting report. I reminded you right at the start that in the sports science literature, particularly around things such as talent identification, a good quality scouting report across a number of different factors with a team of people who have a reliable eye for looking for those factors, not everyone has, all agreeing on what the factors are that they are looking for, is well supported as probably the definitive way to spot talent. Well supported. So in terms of your baseline aspects, extend out the scouting report to start to look at other aspects. Health and lifestyle, sleep, nutrition. Put that into the profile of these athletes. Before you even start spending money on this, just ask the questions. Get some help. Maybe if you start to deal with a nutritionist, that person will come to the table saying, by the way, here's some software we can utilize very easily. Or you may not even need to do it. You just have some kind of dietary record and you change immediately the nutritional package for the athletes. But this is extremely important, the scouting report. We rush for sophistication when you have these things. You just need to adapt them and use them well. And you could extend that to all other areas. How well are we at skating? Well, what are your criteria for skating? You could have the most sophisticated piece of software going, but unless you as a coaching staff agree on what skating has to look like and how to get that from your particular group, it's all for naught. Any video tool, all it's done is record what is done. They may give you some particular angles that are suggested from the literature, but you have to take that information. But you could have actually got to that anyway by your scouting report. So-and-so, look at what he does, she does, whatever it might be. How are we going to change that? How does that affect the squad training program versus the individual one? Who's got to do some remedial work and who doesn't need to do it? Then you come on to basic technologies. This one, for example, linked to things such as the little iWatch, link it to a particular piece of software. It can track things such as sleep, resting heart rate over time, which has its uses. There are some limitations, but it's better than nothing. And if you have good advice as to how to use the information, then of course These can be very worthwhile additives. And remember, people often have these pieces of equipment already. They're just not using them correctly. So you need to be able to educate, or let's use a better word, inform everyone how to use this type of stuff. Let's move to the seasonal plan. Because again, people rush and spend a lot of money on technology, but they've never actually spent any time to look at the dashboard of what they want to plan. How many, and this, I don't expect you to read this, this is just an example, sorry. How many truly plan out your season, and particularly maybe on a multi-year plan? So from this summer through the next winter, through into the spring, and then on into the season, into the summer season in a rolling average across all the things that might be important: health and wellness, physical conditioning, on-ice skills, tactical knowledge, equipment, etc., etc. How many of you really do that? And remember, it's not a fixed entity. It's a framework. It's a guide for you. Nothing goes according to plan perfectly. You're going to have to change things, but at least you have a golden thread. When are you going to do sophisticated forms of training and training analysis? When are you going to really say, we need to do some video analysis on everyone at this moment in time, and then we're going to have an implementation strategy of what we need to fix? You'll notice I've talked about two things now that are pretty simple to do. A very good comprehensive scouting report, where if you sat down and challenged each other, maybe brought in an outsider to challenge you even further, you could really harness an excellent way of establishing what you need to do. A snapshot of your team and where you need to take them. And then the seasonal plan. It can get a bit sophisticated by using a simple software such as Microsoft Excel, or you can buy off-the-shelf systems to help you do it. But a piece of paper as a starting point is always useful. This is actually on one page, just a global plan for age groups of a particular hockey organization. And you can see across the top the big things: skating, technical, tactical, competition, preparation, and even the education of the coaches. And you'll notice there's differences as we come through the age groups. So for example, if you want to have a coach education stream, you've got a different criteria and curriculum for those dealing with youngsters sort of 5 to 8 years of age compared to the ones dealing with, say, in this particular case, national junior teams. They're going to do a whole curriculum for coaching young players. And then if you're at the top flight, coaching a high-level teams, because the coaches yourselves need different information, and you're going to be starting to look at different things. And all the way then through these other areas, the type of things you're working at. And each one of those will have a dashboard. No point moving from Tactical 1 to Tactical 4 unless there's a very good understanding of these players, of all the things you wanted to teach them in Tactical 2 and Tactical 3. You can't do this, you can't do that. For example, here's an analogy. If you can't throw a ball or an object, it kind of rules out a lot of sports, doesn't it? If you can't catch, rules out of things. You can't swim, that kind of rules out water polo, for example. I got into high-performance sailing. And you know what the decision-making for me as a 16-year-old at the time was? Oh, I can swim, so it doesn't matter if I fall in. But if I couldn't have swum, I wouldn't have taken up sailing. Then I wouldn't have gone to the Worlds and all that other type of stuff. You see about the nesting of these things? Okay. That didn't take any technology. That just takes you back to this athlete-centered approach to understand. And it could start with something as simple as a piece of paper. And when you need to go to something more sophisticated, and some excellent examples just up here, some planning tools of where you can go to so that you can reduce the error. And the beauty is, when you've done it once, the next year you only have to make the subtle changes. What would I improve? Remember Kaizen, continual improvement? How do I improve next year? So take the time to at least set the foundation, and then each year just gradually make the adaptations, make the changes. So as we roll forward, if I came and had a conversation with you in 5 years' time, you've got a much more sophisticated view. You know what works and what doesn't in your situation. Okay, so on ice. Lots of stuff, of course, you can do on ice, but it's remarkable what is happening, even at relatively minor levels of hockey. Classic dashboard. What are the type of things we want to look at on ice? Well, skating's kind of fundamental. How are we at skating? And maybe you've got information from your last games and you're saying, our skating's not that good. So then how are you going to take that information against your benchmark? Maybe it was another team, they outskated us. Is it because we were just not well rested? Were we not fit enough? Or is it we can't skate very well? Oh, we can't skate very well, maybe backwards. What are we going to then therefore do to raise the bar? If you don't do something about it, then you can't blame everyone if you get an underperformance, can you? So, nothing wrong with this. Nothing wrong with that at all. Okay? Everyone does it. Call the players over, they sit down. If we have the $ clock just here, not just the clock for the game or the clock for the penalties, but the $, you call them over, you do your little drawings and squiggle around, and some of the kids have got it and some of them haven't. Meanwhile, the $ clock for the cost of the ice, as they sit there and listen to you, is going, well, there's $50 down the drain straight away. So can you get better in terms of your communication? And you heard from people earlier about talking with your players, but there are ways. For one, something I've started to see dramatically is the use of little cameras on the helmet of the coach. Show them the drill on either the big screen in the rink. Can you use that capability that's already there? Here's the drill I want you to do. You can go to the internet. There's video of virtually everything you'd ever want to see in hockey. Show them, get them to do it, film them doing it, and then you immediately wirelessly put it back onto the screen. Or maybe you just hang, a 60-inch LCD screen on the glass in practice. People are doing it already, very rapidly. And understand, remember, the way we learn is very, very visual, highly visual. Even more so when you can actually put it. Why do you think virtual reality and the e-games and the e-sports are coming at us hard and fast? Because it takes it away from the simple line diagrams to something that's very real for the brain to understand. And when people see themselves doing something. So you show them what the benchmark might be, then you show them what they just did, and show them again what the benchmark is, and away they go, very, very quickly. You sometimes don't even have to say anything. And in fact, if you go to an athlete-centered model, you can say, what did you just see in the video that we just did? I was out of position here, or so-and-so. Get the idea? Much more so than just using the old sort of dry marker board. Nothing wrong with that. I'm just telling you where your competition is going. There are very fine examples. There's one up there in terms of competition analysis. Many use different sort of forms of tracking. This one uses a pattern recognition system. This is something that actually a system we've used quite effectively. It's used a lot in soccer and rugby across the world. Many of the top clubs, whether they're in the Spanish, the Italian, the English leagues, the German leagues, use things either like this one or this particular one. This actually came out of a PhD project at the Australian Institute of Sport a number of years ago for swimming. That's how this accelerometer was actually utilized. I was actually the external examiner for the kid that developed this. But they've gone on and marketed it, and like the video analysis systems, these are tools that have great use. The issue is learning how to use them, and virtually everyone I know that uses these type of sophisticated systems who's any good, so any of the major training centers across the globe, from Leipzig to the AIS through to USOC at Colorado Springs, they mold them, adapt them to their needs. There's always a danger in just taking face value a black box. You need to understand what it's doing for you. And they're very useful tools, but you can't just be a sort of uninformed consumer of these things. Okay? You've got to, if you're going to get in bed with a particular group, then you need to really be part of their R&D in the field. Okay? Without selling your soul. That's a word of a caution. And whenever I bought any equipment in our physiology lab, a metabolic card or something, we would rip it to pieces to understand truly how it worked. Not just what the manufacturer would tell us. Same for you. And how can you customize this for your needs, whatever it is? Can it grow with you? That's the other thing. Off-ice. Off-ice is exactly the same. Some of that equipment I've just shown you, that last one, You know, you can use it in your dry land training. You've got all these other technologies for tracking sleep. One of the most important things, probably one of the most powerful things you have in your arsenal of coaching, is to make sure your athletes get enough rest and recovery. There are ways to track more than one athlete with virtually all these tools. There are ways they can track themselves individually, and you give them responsibility, again, an athlete-centered approach, where they link it to the smartphone dumps information directly to the cloud, and you can access that, at least the information that you've all agreed that you should be able to see. Got to be some privacy. By the same time, the one on the left there, you can use these similar devices to track the entire team at the same time. So gone are the days where you could only track one or two people. You can track the entire groups, in training, out of training, and increasingly because of wearable technology built underneath the protective clothing or actually into the clothing, even during games. We just have to see whether or not the leagues are going to allow you to start to utilize these technologies, or if they see them as an advantage in the future. Some sports actually restrict very carefully the type of technologies that are available in competition as opposed to training. Psychological, we always forget about this one, and I mentioned right at the start, for me, even though I'm a physiologist originally, psychology is absolutely vital. Not simply the psychology of the, if you like, grit and determination, but even that emotional aspect. We've watched hockey change quite dramatically because of some of the rather unfortunate events from a physicality point of view. One of the most important things we need to teach our youngsters as they come through the development ranks in the physical contact aspect of the game is not simply when to make the hit, but when not to make the hit, and what type of hit. I had a conversation over the course of the few days here where it is pretty clear to me and many others in this room, there are people that should not be playing hockey professionally because of their attitude around the game. They are actually dangerous people. So psychology is very important overall. From the relaxation point of view, there is tons and tons of apps for most smartphones, okay, from Android to iOS. Loads and loads of them. One's for mindfulness, built this into yoga and flexibility components and suppleness. Many things. There should be no excuse nowadays for not being able to access some kind of cheap, reliable technology to help with dealing with some form of stress. And remember, we always seem to focus on the game and training stress, but those are only a few hours of each day for your athletes and yourselves. What about the other, let's say you see them 4 hours out of a day. What are they doing with the other 20 hours of the day when they should be looking after themselves, taking care of themselves? You're expecting them to come back ready for the next game or the next training session to be optimally prepared for that. But they've got 20 hours to screw it up. Gave them a day off. What did they do? They're in a different town they've never been to before, and they decide to go sightseeing for 6 hours, walk around the place, so they're exhausted. Well, the girlfriend or boyfriend came along, and now they went shopping. And you expected them to have rest, and you had an idea in your mind of what rest looked like. Equipment. I don't know exactly how much money goes into equipment design, but it's a lot of money. And even independently, looking at characteristics of sticks, particularly as we've gone to the composite sticks of the current sort of era. There's big studies a few years ago, as you know, several universities undertook studies for the NHL as to why the early versions were breaking so much. Doesn't matter to the average pro because they're given the sticks, but to the little kid and parent spending $1 gazillion every time, it does matter if they don't even last, half a season. But how well matched are these sticks necessarily to your players from a skill point of view? We can't now, there's the aspect of, say, soft hands, for example, which we all should be teaching from a very young age, how to catch something or decelerate it, take the energy out of it. In other words, a puck coming at you at Mach 2, can you absorb that energy? Well, maybe you as a human can, but what happens if the stick as an extension to you is not designed appropriately, or you can't control the stick. You can shoot hard with it, but you actually can't control an object that's coming at the blade with a particular velocity. You understand what I'm saying? So in alpine skiing, right now at this time of year, we are testing, and so is every other nation, all the equipment for next year optimally. From the actual ski, the radius of its cut, talking to the manufacturer, the plate, the binding, the boot interface with that skier. The angle, the cant, all this type of stuff. So we know what we can train through in the course of the summer and then into competition. But we glibly just go into store and I want a Patrick Kane bend like this, blah, 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 because I love Patrick Kane or whatever it might be, and I like this Bauer stick. I'm going to buy this one. It may not be suited to me at all. And that kid will get that in their brain for the next 20 years that this is the stick they're going to use. I'm just asking you to consider. And then think about the racing car on their feet, the skates. Well, I mentioned vision earlier. You know, the very least, a number of years ago, Oakley for one, I have no association with Oakley, were able to manufacture a visor where the curvature, okay, and the parallax, okay, of distortion, they were able to really almost take out of the equation. And the visual acuity, therefore, of wearing this particular device elevated the ability to actually see over the eye. But how many people do you see wearing this? Well, you know why? Because the tradition is not to wear anything, maybe a little bit down to here. They'd still lose teeth, because the stick's coming straight here. It's kind of stupid, really. But you've got to be men, I guess. But think about this, particularly as the eyes tire. And as I said, in the future, there's going to be things built into these visors, actually giving you information, way beyond the Google glasses. And it's here now in some sports. In luge, for example, the visor, okay, can be set such that the parallax allows you to see what's down at your feet without moving your head up, because if you move your head up, of course, you lose streamlining and you add drag. Just a little, that's a subtle version. So I want you to be very careful about that. There's lots of literature. You don't have to be an expert in engineering. Again, who's your trusted source to tell you about the things that are going on to help? You may have noticed, maybe systematically, you've got a sponsorship. Everyone wears a particular type of skate, and they've all been told to sharpen it in a certain way. Well, is that actually what the literature says? Could we just make a subtle way in which the blade is prepared even, that could actually improve performance? Do you know that? Kind of important. Skating's kind of a fundamental thing in the sport. If this were Formula One, I guarantee they would have looked at the skate pretty carefully. Okay, to finish off, this is my rant. It's a very personal one. It comes back to that issue of the coaches coaching our development group, and even the first rung on the professional ladder here, let's say 19 to about 23, this particular group here, but certainly here, and what they are actually coaching in terms of preparation. Remember, in age group coaching, one of your fundamental jobs is to get them ready for whatever is going to happen next for them. Get the 15-year-olds to be ready to be a 16-year-old hockey player. Get a 16-year-old ready to be a 17-year-old. But if we're constantly always really based on our experience coaching rather than you as experts in the field casting your mind, how would I really like to see this game played? So I'm going to point out a couple of things for you. I do not understand at all in this game why any team would ever give the puck away. It's an invasion sport. But we have grown up in an era where the game wasn't as fast. People arguably at times weren't necessarily that sophisticated in the way they play. There was definitely lag moments in the game. And we got into the way of, whoa, what's the best way of changing our team on the ice? I know, put the puck as far away as possible so that we can all rush off the ice, the other guys can come on, and by the time we get back, the puck's coming up to us through the neutral zone, maybe. In the modern day, I'm sorry, you should look to other sports as to what has happened in invasion sports, even soccer. Hold on to the puck ball, long as possible. Could you do something more sophisticated where you change your 3 forwards. But the defense stay on and keep the puck as the other 3 come forward, as the other 3 come on. I'm just suggesting to you, think about how this is happening. Now, if you're going to play that game, you keep the puck. And you also have a game when you don't have the puck, you are in the faces of this other team, the powerful forecheck. You can imagine, therefore, what training has to look like. Okay? The skill level has to go through the roof if you're going to keep the puck, plus the confidence of your 2 defensemen and the goalie, poor guy or girl, okay? We've got 2 defensemen with the puck and the other opposing team's coming at them, and you haven't got your guys on the ice yet. That takes a confidence to do the right thing with the puck. But you've got lots of space. And then the forecheck. Think of the fitness level, the decision-making. So fitness level to play that high-intensity type of game, to really aggressively go after the forecheck and be able to get back on D when you need it. Plus, to be able to make the decisions fast enough so that you don't expose your team too drastically. You're going to do it inevitably on a really powerful forecheck, right? So you need to make sure, one, what are the odds of me doing this? And we always talk about the percentage plays at times, but if you're going to play a very fast, very aggressive forecheck, and you're going to keep the puck the rest of the time, skill level, physical fitness, decision making, they all have to be increased. Again, if you're going to start to train that way, how are you going to look after your athletes? Because that's going to put even more load on them. There are teams starting to do that, but not looking after their athletes. And it's no wonder we see breakdown in athletes. So fast decisions for me, and then obviously the key thing we all know, you back it up with great net minding. But how do you develop great net minders? So I want to go back to the development route a little bit, because it's a real problem in Canada. One, they want to be goalies at 6, so that's a bit of a problem. Then they get to like 10 years of age and they're pretty crap as a goalie, but now they can't skate, so they can't play hockey anymore. I'm being facetious, of course. The other thing, of course, is if you want to get good at something, time on task is kind of important. So if you're some 15-year-old and your parents want you to be on the best team going, they put you on this team, which is a winning team, you've got good offense, good defense, and you as a goalie don't get many shots, except maybe in practice. And yet, the very thing that's going to help you get better is having lots of shots. So ideally, you want to put all your goalies on shitty teams, where the defense sucks, and they've got hundreds of shots coming at them every year. Really. And worse still, completely random. Shots coming at them all over the place, tons of experience. But no. The adults around them want them to be on a winning team, get a nice little trophy. Stop the puck 20 times. Whoop-de-whoop. So what I'm trying to say to you is, unless you start to sit back and ask yourself, why? I want good tending. Why? Well, because it's an absolutely fundamental component. How are we going to get good goaltending? Okay, we need to do this. And then you put into practice the what to do that. So as you start to look at how you are coaching and training your netminders, one of the things I would be doing is you might actually have players that are not on the team who are specifically there to help the netminders. You actually have a playing roster. Their whole job, their whole existence, maybe 3, 4 of them, I don't know. You have a dummy forward line who are here to help that guy get better. Do you see what I'm saying? Maybe I'm losing you on that bit. No, so it's a bit like, you know, sometimes in basketball, teams will deliberately put an extra defenseman on the practice team they're playing so that the real team has to work harder, work out their tactics. You get the idea? Because you can do anything you like in practice. So I'm saying with your netminders, you're practicing with all your team, you know, the 3 forwards and the 2 defensemen in one time, and maybe they're playing with a goalie, but at other times, maybe, because you don't want to just tire them out, so you've got to give this goalie loads and loads of shots, right? And remember, there's a double-edged sword. If you're going to use your team players all the time, they're working hard to help the goalie. That's a good thing, they're practicing, right? But to do the level, the volume of training for the goalie, the goalie needs to get hundreds and hundreds of thousands of shots. So what I'm saying is you have another sort of ghost roster of guys who are not on your team, because they don't worry, and they come out and they give the guy hundreds and hundreds of shots. I was once at the Beijing Sport University watching the Chinese volleyball team practice. Now, you all know the idea of a spike, right? Yeah, spike. And so he was at the actual drill the coach was going through. He had this big box, okay? So he was standing above the level of the net, okay? And there was the guy he was training was the guy that's going to do the dig, okay, for the spike coming in. With me on that? Okay. So the normal way teams often do this is there's one poor old coach who gets up there and he's firing them down at this guy, firing them down, and then he gets tired, and then he gets no good at actually replicating the velocity or the accuracy to actually challenge this guy doing the dig with it, right, with me? And then they just replace him and so forth. So they, you know, what they wouldn't do, they wouldn't change the guy doing this bit. They would change that guy to give this guy rest while the other defenseman comes in. Get the idea? But the real problem is this guy. So the Chinese didn't do that. They had a whole bunch of other guys who were very good at spiking, would come in to train the national team, and when the first guy got tired, they would leave this guy there. He's now had like 30 digs he's had to do. Then they bring a fresh guy up, and he would fire 30 at this guy. So at the end of half an hour, this guy's had hundreds of digs he's had to do. Do you see how to approach the situation very differently? The challenge comes back to why? Why? What are you trying to do? And we do things so traditionally, and it's the way we're playing the game. I challenge you all, never give up the puck. How can you change your lines still retaining that pressure and learn to play physically enough so that you'll forecheck? Because game theory would tell you to do that. Basketball's restricted. They rush down the court, score or not score, and immediately they have to give the ball to the other people, okay? They've either given it to them because they didn't score and the other team's got the ball, or they scored and the other team get the ball to come back, right? So you get into this toing and froing back and forth. And really, okay, there's two things that happen. Execution to score, the invasion bit, and repelling the invasion of the other team. Those are the two fundamental tactics. You're not that much different, except for the fact you don't have to leave the puck down the other end until, ironically, of your own volition, you score, and then there's a face-off. But why? You go to all this effort to get the puck in the first place. You see teams do it. Battling, then they rush down, they're all so tired, better get off the ice, dump it in. And we've been allowed to get away with that because of the development, of course, of the boards over the years, and the glass. And we do things out of tradition rather than you really thinking, how can you move this forward? But as I caution you, to play the style, it comes back to the athlete-centered approach and the monitoring. Because to play that way, you need to do X, Y, and Z. It's why I showed you that diagram at the start around physiology, tactics, all those type of things. You then have to train, and if you're dealing with development groups coming through to you, farm teams, whatever, you need to start to train them to do these things, which brings me to the final point. Any of you that are lucky enough to have an associated development group coming through, so a senior team that has a farm team. Maybe I don't know, you're in a club situation where you have a conveyor belt of kids coming through various age groups. Do you have a common coaching philosophy all the way through? Are they being taught to play to the system that you expect the senior team to play eventually? Because the very best, if we went to look at FC Barcelona and we went and looked at La Masia, the farmhouse, okay, and we saw what the U15s were doing, and the U17s were doing, and the U19s were doing. They're learning to play this way. There's a common theme, and then if it's out of whack, you can easily change that because you've got the golden thread. So I'm going to finish there. We went all around the houses. The key points for me, coming technology at it, you've got to be in the game. There's some great available stuff already. If you're going to work with any particular group, get in bed with them. Show them how you're going to use it. Help be part of their R&D for the future. The key thing, before you even make that step, is who is your trusted source that can come and sit down with you and say, what do you think you need? And what I know about you, actually, I think this is more what you need. Let's have that discussion, and you come up with what do you actually need and what's going to really help you move forward. And then finally, you are using these tools to be able to train effectively to play the way you want to play. It's like those Russian dolls. The way you play is the outside of the doll. I literally, if If you do it as far as I'm concerned, I should be able to walk into any rink, you not wearing your team colours, just black jerseys or white jersey, from the way you warm up to the way you play that first period, I should be able to say, oh, I know who that is. I know that team. Okay? I know that's a team from Finland, that's a team from Denmark, whatever. Know exactly. You know why we have this discussion in Canada all the time, and we changed our attitude a little bit with our national teams, because we would bring different coaches in for every team, okay? So the U17s, there'd be a different coach this year than last year, and all this type of stuff. And we wondered why our results were up and down like yo-yos, all depending on different philosophies, because you're going to try and condition all these kids in a very short period of time to play to a certain way for a tournament they're not normally used to. Small round robin and then sudden death pretty quickly, where normally they grow up always having a second chance in playoffs, right? There's 7-game series or 5-game. Not when you come to these tournaments. Past the medal, past the round robin, it's sudden death. You got to play. I don't care if you feel shitty or you had a bad night last night. You got to play tonight this way. I need you to do this type of stuff. But one of the other things, we were so inconsistent. We didn't have a Canadian way of playing the game, other than we were fairly well known for being physical and taking lots of penalties. So what we started to do, we started to bring all the coaches in that were possibly in the pool of coaches in our national teams. And you had to demonstrate an ability with a younger age group before we would move you through the system. And we started, and we're still only scratching the surface, of gradually getting everyone to come to a common philosophy, a common way of thinking. How are we going to play the game? So that eventually, other than the physicality, you can tell the way a Canadian team would come and play on the ice. And if we start to underperform, then we have the ability to change the things that are underperforming because we know that they're consistent. Okay? So if you have that advantage, I would ask those questions. You may be the senior coach, but if you're expecting some of these kids to graduate to you, you might want to make sure that they're learning the system coming through. And again, technology can help you with that. Thank you very much.